Jewish Channel's Week in Review. Why Israelis are having trouble visiting the United States, how matzah gets made, talking about Hillary Clinton as Secretary of State, and more of the Jewish news that's changing your world right now in this episode of the Week in Review. Hello, and welcome to the Jewish Channel's Week in Review. I'm Stephen I. Weiss. If we're not allowed in your place, you're not allowed in ours. That's the message the State Department is sending to Israel in keeping the Jewish state from joining the Visa Waiver Program, which allows foreign travelers to enter the United States without a visa. Israeli travelers are required to have a visa to enter the United States, unlike those from 37 other countries that have been allowed into the Visa Waiver Program. While speculation about the reason for Israel's non-admission has run high in recent weeks, a spokesperson for the State Department made clear that Israel's discrimination against certain American travelers is a key consideration. She said, quote, "The Department of Homeland Security and the Department of State remain concerned with the unequal treatment that Palestinian Americans and other Americans of Middle Eastern origin experience at Israel's border and checkpoints, and reciprocity is the most basic condition of the Visa Waiver Program." Also at issue is a high rate of refusal for Israeli travelers seeking a visa. The program generally requires countries to have a rejection rate below 3%, but nearly 10% of Israelis were rejected in their visa applications last year. The reason why so many Israelis are being rejected is widely assumed to be illegal activity, in which young Israelis are working without green cards for businesses here in the U.S. In another example of problems for Israel on the international economic front, Israeli manufacturers are complaining about the practices of companies based in the West Bank. The Manufacturers Association of Israel complained to Israel's economy ministry that firms producing products in the West Bank are labeling their products as made in Israel and said they should not be doing so. According to the Jerusalem Post, quote, "The manufacturers complain that factories over the Green Line benefit from tax breaks and other advantages, but do not always operate in accordance with the rules of Israeli industry, such as meeting certain quality standards and upholding workers' rights." And it's more than just businesses within the West Bank that are being challenged from within Israel's Green Line. The Knesset this week decided not to fund new settlement construction, with the Finance Committee postponing a vote on transferring $51 million to fund settlement construction after it became clear that there weren't enough votes to pass the measure, due in large part to the influence of the Yesh Atid party that surprised so many by winning a substantial place in the government in last year's election. Now, this doesn't necessarily mean that there is now a centrist anti-settlement growth bloc in the Knesset that can win votes there. The opposition to the funding drew in large part from the lack of transparency in funding for settlement construction. If that transparency issue is fixed, we might see a different result. But in the realm of who's allowed to do what in Israel, keeping some stores open on the Jewish Sabbath is still a controversial move, but Tel Aviv may explicitly allow some businesses to do so after a city council vote on Monday. The city council isn't the last word on this. The Interior Ministry would have to approve as well in order for the stores to legally remain open on the Sabbath. But some establishments already do remain open on the Sabbath, though they're generally the businesses large enough to absorb fines for doing so as part of the cost of doing business. This would be the first time explicit permission was granted. Tel Aviv Mayor Ron Huldai said of the measure, quote, "We mustn't turn this issue into religious war. The principle that led to this bill is keeping the Tel Aviv spirit, one that cares for the Shabbat as the day of rest, as a social value in the Jewish state, and also allows for the provision of services for everyone to use this day of rest as they wish." Moving on, we're heading quickly into Passover season when special foods and diets reign in so much of the Jewish community, and special sections dominate so many supermarkets. But how does that Passover food get made? Meredith Gansman visited the Manischewitz factory to find out.
Passover is a time when many Jews go all out in the kitchen. But when it comes to making the most famous food for the holiday, matzah, Tamar Ganger, executive editor of joyofkosher.com, says, don't try it at home.
These days where everything is much more strict, the way we do things, and because of the fact that it's so easy to buy stuff that's well supervised by rabbis, it's something that people just stay away from doing in their home.
Leaving it to the pros, I visited the Manischewitz factory to see how the matzahs most of us eat are made, by machine rather than by hand. 2 months before Passover, when snow thickly covered the ground in Newark, New Jersey, Manischewitz had long been preparing to produce millions of pounds of matzah for the springtime holiday.
Getting ready for Passover is my favorite time of year. Everything is moving fast in the plant. We have many lines that are running. It's very exciting times. It's fun time.
Suited up, Randall Copeland, Vice President of Operations at Manischewitz, showed me how its age-old matzah recipe comes together, which starts with combining its only 2 ingredients, flour and water. So once the flour and the water touch, you have 18 minutes for it to get into the oven, and this is where that process starts. At first, the dough almost looks like sand, but completely mixed, it forms a Play-Doh-like consistency and is then rolled out.
This is what happens after you put the pressure of those very large rolls onto the dough. Now it really acts like dough. As one end of the sheet ends, you start another, so you always have 4 layers of dough to work with. Each roll takes out about half the thickness.
Then sheets are cut into individual matzahs.
We trim off the edges so they're nice and square. When we make Passover matzah, there's no recycling. So this isn't used. When we make daily matzah, recycling's okay. This gets added back at the first roll.
Perforating the dough makes the matzah flaky, while it bakes through the oven for about 4 minutes. Bricks from Manishevitz's original handmade brick oven line the bottom of its current ovens.
They had 65 years of flavor baked into them, and they didn't want to lose that.
Then the matzahs cool on the conveyor belt, flipping out the top so both sides are exposed. To see more from how matzah is made at the Manischewitz Company factory, tune into the full broadcast version of the Week in Review.
Thank you, Meredith. Finally, this week on Up Close, she's far ahead of anyone even rumored to be a presidential candidate in 2016. But what do we know now about Hillary Clinton that we didn't when she last ran for president and before she served as Secretary of State? Jonathan Allen and Amy Parnas teamed up to write HRC, State Secrets and the Rebirth of Hillary Clinton, and they stopped by TJC Studios to talk about their take. Now, Hillary Clinton is known as something of a Democratic hardliner on Israel, but increasingly, a portion of the Jewish community is not only not sharing that position on Israel, but is actually taking an anti-Zionist approach. Also in this week's episode of Up Close, I interview one of the intellectual leaders of that movement, Max Blumenthal. Here are some of the highlights of my interview with Jonathan Allen and Amy Parnas. So Hillary Clinton, broadly expected to be a contender in 2016 and is a frontrunner in a way probably almost no one has been in anything like recent memory. So what do we learn from your book that we need to know for 2016?
I think what you learn is how she makes decisions, and particularly in the most prominent role that she's had, as a senator, even as First Lady. These are not positions where you manage big bureaucracies. The State Department, 70,000 people flung across the world. I think what you really get out of the book is a sense of what her priorities are, how she manages people, what she's learned from past mistakes and what she hasn't learned from past mistakes. And so as a result of that, I think you can project a little bit about how she would govern if she were president of the United States.
And one of the interesting things about the way that you put it together is that a lot of books about Washington, a lot of books about government deal with motivations and who's motivated to do this, that, and the other thing. But a lot of what you describe about Hillary's process is relationships and how relationships drive a lot of her decision making and how she gets things done.
This is somebody who works hard at relationships. She doesn't have the natural charisma or charm of her husband. Few of us do, but that's the instantaneous comparison that everyone makes. As a result, I think in politics, she really has to work harder to impress people.
A woman who sent 16,000 thank you notes after the campaign ended, and then after her State Department time, she sent out another several thousand. She likes to have a personal touch. She likes to make connections with people, and I think that's, if we were to compare her to the current president, he's often criticized for being aloof and not having that touch. She and her husband are actually different creatures. They like to have that relationship.
And also a consideration is exactly how she's looked upon as a Secretary of State. And right now we're in the middle of seeing America's foreign policy seeming to blow up, that we've got problems in Crimea, we've got further problems in Syria, we've got problems in Turkey. As we speak, Israel's defense minister gave a speech saying he feels America's strength is weakening and America is losing its status as the global policeman, and he's not sure what that's, and that maybe Israel now has to feel like it is a lone actor in the world.
But one thing that Secretary Clinton always, I think as senator she had a tougher approach, and she felt like Israel comes first, and she made that point known. And I think Republicans we talked to Ileana Ross-Lehtinen for this book, who basically said, it's a shame that she wasn't as tough as Secretary of State as she was when she was senator and as Israel friendly. I think she will probably creep back to that side as she runs in 2016.
And we think the Israel policy was really handled by the White House early in the Obama administration. So the State Department obviously had some role in the Israel policy, but not, for the most part, not until the very end when she ended up flying in to work on that ceasefire.
Well, but she was involved in, for example, calling for a freeze on settlement building in, I believe that would have been 2009, 2010.
Right, very early.
And so what was she actually doing on the Israel front in those years?
It's a reasonable question. I mean, I think she was going with the Obama policy. I mean, I don't think there's any question about that. It was part and parcel of that was there was some suspicion within Obama's foreign policy councils about her allegiance to him after the 2008 primary. So there was no daylight between the two of them for the first couple of years. And then once she started to get, once she was accepted more as somebody who was loyal to him, I think she started to assert herself a little bit more on a variety of issues.
And I think people know that, you do work for your boss. And so I think that there's some room there that people understand that she was actually, working for President Obama and not really able to assert what she really felt.
You can see the full episode of Up Close on the Jewish Channel on cable, or listen to the full audio available as a podcast on iTunes or on your favorite podcast player. That's all for this week. For all of us here at the Jewish Channel, be well. Jewish Channel is available on cable. Time Warner Cable Channel 528, IO Optimum Channel 505, RCN Channel 268, Bright House Channel 330, Verizon Fios Channel 900, Cox Cable Channel 1, Frontier Communications, and on Comcast in the on-demand menu under Premium Channels. For more information, visit tjctv.com.